Hello, this is Lucille Kring, and welcome to KRINGS Corner. This week for this show, I've invited two gentlemen that are my favorite guests. They've been on the program several times in the past. They're controversial, they're spirited, they're intriguing, they're entertaining, and they are Ron Winship, who is the producer of A Cutting Edge, a talk show, and Larry Gilbert, who is the reporter for A Cutting Edge, a talk show. Gentlemen, thanks for coming back.
Thanks for inviting us.
You're always fun. There's always interesting things to talk about with you two, because you are really up to date and up to speed on what's topical. Just this past week, the Supreme Court ended their 2004-2005 term, and it happens every year with the Supreme Court. The most intriguing, the most interesting, the most controversial items come out the last minute. Is that because they're taking 3 months off and they don't want to hear about it, or why did they save it for the end? But one of the ones was the eminent domain issue that came out of Connecticut. Give us a little overview of that, Larry, and then tell us what your thoughts about that ruling are.
I'd be happy to. As you know, we met through a meeting of the Californians United for Redevelopment Education. And one of the issues that we focus on is the topic of eminent domain. And in the Constitution, in the Bill of Rights, the Fifth Amendment clearly says, the last words are, "Nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation." You know, it's interesting. We've seen a lot of cases like this. It can happen to anybody at any time, at any place. And one of the men that I met was Ronzel Cato, who owned a home up in Fresno. And the problem is, the ones that suffer the most, I hate to say this, I think are the people in the minorities who don't have the connections and they don't have the clout to fight for themselves. They don't have deep pockets. His home was taken for a turkey processing plant. And he was a fifth-generation African-American, the first one to ever be able to buy a piece of America, the dream that we all espouse to.
How did they get away with that?
Through the same thing that just happened with this ruling. They declared it blighted, eminent domain, and offered him 10 cents on a dollar. But I got to share with you, I just came back from a vacation for 3 weeks out of the country, and I was in London last Friday, and I promised my wife I was going to stay away from the internet, I was going to stay away from politics, and this is the Financial Times of London last Friday.
Let me get that.
And the headline covers this very issue, the decision by the Supreme Court to throw out our Bill of Rights. Forget about property rights.
Well, it's amazing because, as you mentioned, in the Constitution it says you can take a piece of property that's owned by a private individual or a private concern for a public use. And what the framers intended was perhaps a school, a freeway, a library, something that would benefit the public at large. But you're talking somebody lost their home to another private enterprise.
There's the key issue here is that there's been no problem with taking property from the general public for the betterment of the community in a public sense. Now that has been lapped over into, let's say, sports arenas.
Right.
Let's say it's gone into areas of public domain where you're really increasing the value of the property of the particular community you live in. So that's where this has gone to. It's gone to a point where there were 50 people that have beautiful old-style homes in London, Connecticut, and that have been there for generations, many of them, and their property is being taken for a Pfizer plant and for a mall. And the reason why is because Pfizer built their manufacturing plant and they made a side deal and said, hey, you know what we'd like to expand our manufacturing capabilities, and we're going to go in there and do that. Well, it's never what it seems to be at the front end. And so now what the Supreme Court has done has virtually disemboweled every person that has a property in this country. The reason why I say that, I mean, that's pretty outrageous, this comment, but it's
true.
But it's absolutely true. What they can do is if the local city council, where you're sitting with 5 or 7 votes, and they're saying, well, you know, we don't like you. Well, we're going to make your house, you're going to take your house away from you, and we're going to make that into a mini mall and a gas station. They can do it.
Absolutely.
And they can do it because they can say, we're going to get more money out of it or whatever. And these are the kind of things that are, I mean, we can't, the only way we're going to be able to defend ourselves from this is through state issues of having the legislature act immediately to protect us. And I think Tom McClintock's trying to do that now, but it's a tough road.
It is. It's very tough, and each one of us is in jeopardy because most of us, this country was based on property rights.
Correct.
It's life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but actually it would, before they changed it, it was going to be life, liberty, and property rights, because property rights were so inherent to the beginnings of this country. If you had a piece of property, you were secure in your domain. Nobody could come and take it. But the city of Stanton, a number of years ago, considered the whole town blighted, and people were very offended by that, because then they could come in and take eminent domain and make it a redevelopment because of the tax increment. But when you're taking private property, I mean, that is scary.
Lucy, let me jump in and share with you the case that they refer to goes back to 1954, and it was Berman versus Parker in Washington, D.C. And I just want to read you a sentence from the syllabus. If Congress decides that the nation's capital shall be beautiful as well as sanitary, there is nothing in the Fifth Amendment that stands in the way. That's a quote right from that
Now
case.
that is very scary.
Let me share with you the difference. In their argument, they admit that there is no blight in the New London case. Big difference. It's a stretch, I think, to compare the two cases. In Berman, the neighborhood, and I'm going to quote from the Supreme Court ruling, O'Connor dissension. The neighborhood had so deteriorated that, for example, 64.3% of its dwellings were beyond repair. 348 have become burdened with overcrowding of dwellings, lack of adequate streets and alleys, lack of light and air, and Congress determined that the neighborhood had become injurious to the public health, safety, morals, and welfare, and it goes on. The point I make is that they found a justification there. Berman had a department store there, which he maintained. Their attitude is that everything else in the surrounding area was run down. But there was another solution that they had, and that was code enforcement.
Right.
They did not have to use eminent domain in that case to solve their problem.
No.
I think we need to cut to the chase here, Larry, and you could come back with something that's, I think, is really important in this process, and that is, how is anything determined as a redevelopment district? Nobody has that real knowledge about how that process works. Do you know the answer to that?
There should be very specific guidelines as to what qualifies in order to be declared blighted. And it's the economic conditions. I grew up in a little city called Newark, New Jersey, and I lived through the riots, where we had high unemployment, high crime, burned out buildings, overturned cars in the street. That are the criteria for what is a blighted area. In the New London case, even in their own opinion, the opinion of the court majority was that those conditions didn't exist. They just happened to be falling within an area that they wanted to take over and put a convention center on the waterfront and put in some new homes.
Well, and it's always, cities are always begging for money. I mean, it's really the way of, it's a beast that rears its ugly head. Cities always cry for more money.
Beverly Hills is a good example. They have a redevelopment district. I mean, obviously they're not a traditionally blighted area.
Right.
I think we're getting to the point where I think that the laws have to be made to make these things more specific and to really identify the next use for it. But what those 5 justices did in the Supreme Court is an outrage. It's a total outrage to our. And it was very interesting to notice also that it was the 4 very conservative justices that came down on the minority side and said, no, that's wrong. You're doing a terrible thing.
Well, why would you say you were surprised? Because I would have thought they were for property rights, which, as a conservative, that's what we believe in, property rights. It was Kennedy who was the swing vote, so he went to the other side, and he can go either way. So it's just an amazing situation. But I know the Republicans are usually considered for big business, and the liberals are usually for the little guy, and this way it's just flipped.
Yeah.
But it's nice to have a Pfizer because they provide jobs and a tax base and everything else and the products that we use, because it's a great pharmaceutical company, but it never should have happened in this way. New London is a fairly small community, but it's a beautiful community because it's a lot of water, it's on the waterfront. But this is just outrageous. As you mentioned a bit ago, Senator Tom McClintock from Thousand Oaks has already started legislation to put something into place in California. He's looking for co-sponsors, so if you can call your senators and also your assemblymen and tell them to sign on as a co-sponsor to the Tom McClintock bill, that would not have the Supreme Court not affect California, so we couldn't do that.
It's the indiscriminate use, I think, issue that's really the scary part of this. It's not what, you know, I mean, it's empowering people that didn't have power before. Small people in small, you know, towns throughout this country now have been empowered to take away people's property they don't particularly like.
Right.
And it becomes downright personal in many cases.
It does.
Where you have people that show up every week and
Write the
complain
check for your campaign.
they complain at their local city hall, or else they're being supported by people in the community. And either way, they're targets for possible bad judgment by the...
There's some business people who, when I was on council, always said to me, we love redevelopment, we love this, and if you just eminent domain this, or I can get a better business or a better piece of land or whatever, then I'd really be happy and the city would get more tax base. And my comment was, if I can do it for you, I can do it to you. So it becomes a double-edged sword. So if Pfizer comes in, who's to say in 10, 15 years, when their building starts to look a little drabby, that somebody comes in and says, let's do a Costco, because the tax base from a Costco is a lot better than the tax base of Pfizer.
The unintended consequences are from the fact that when you change the character of a community, traditionally a community, let's say in the East Coast, you've got these fishing villages around New England and so on, and you change that whole flavor of that location. And maybe you cause that whole property value system to go up very quickly. Suddenly they find new reasons why they redevelop quicker.
Right.
And so these things that would normally take maybe 50 years to accomplish can be done in 3 or 4. That's the scary part of that process.
That's true. And usually when a society or a public entity takes a property by eminent domain, it's always just compensation. But what does that mean? So most times, at least in local government, they'll take the property by eminent domain, and lots of times the buyer is a willing seller rather, and so it's okay if you take a piece of my land or if you take my property, because I do want to sell it. I do want to move. You're going to give me moving help and all that. And then they usually go to court and settle what is just compensation. And so when that person got 10 cents on the dollar, that's very typical, unless a person who, with resources, can go to court and say, okay, you can have the property, but I do want my day in court for the money.
And especially those the communities like New London, for example. Nobody sold a piece of property there for 30 or 40 years. How do you justify a comp on that process? You can't, because you don't know when was the last sale of an acre of land there with that particular type of property.
And then where do those people go? Because usually inherent in this type of a situation is relocation. But if you've been in this beautiful place and your family's been there for 3, 4, 5 generations, where is something comparable to what you currently have?
One of the owners, in fact, mentioned that. He said, they're offering us $250,000 for waterfront property in New London. He says, what can we buy for $250,000 anywhere in the country?
An apartment.
Not happening. So,
no, that's really true. So that is really sad.
Yeah. And they're always on the cheap, by the way. These redevelopment agencies always find a way. In Newport Beach, we had the fire department wanted to take a piece of waterfront property on the back bay. They finally, because of the outrage by everybody, they wanted to give them, I think, $1.1 million, which was dead bottom for waterfront property in Newport Beach. Wound up giving them $4 million, which was fine because the property was not just a single lot. Now we're talking about a very large piece of property. But I mean, my goodness gracious, that took a lot of outrage from the local community to say you're just ripping these poor 85-year-old people off. And they had nowhere to go, they had nothing to do, and they're just saying, well, you've only lived there for 50 years, who cares?
And see, that's so sad, because sometimes you really cause them to die a lot quicker because they die of a broken heart and depression. So what's that? But $4 million, great for the seller, but you have to consider the taxpayer too. So there's always that, you have a double-edged sword there too. So you were going to tell us about a funny story about Judge Souter. And David Souter lives in New Hampshire, and he was one of the people who voted for this outrageous constitutional bill.
I received an email this morning, and I'm going to send some money, because we're going to buy his house in New Jersey. New Hampshire. We're going to have it declared blighted by the city council, and we're going to convert it into a hotel. And I think this is a great idea, because until it hits you, you can't appreciate the impact of something like that happening.
Okay. But, okay, it's not, you're going to send money, but there's a group who's doing this.
Yes, there is.
And what is the name of the group?
And what's her web address?
I won't put out his address because I don't think that's appropriate.
No, but he's been out, it's some group.
Rightmarch.com.
Oh, yeah.
I got the letter from William Green, the president, this morning, and it says, take action. It's not a prank, and I agree. The town of Weir, spelled W-E-A-R-E, has 5 people on the Board of Selectmen, which is like a city council. If 3 of them vote to use the power of eminent domain to take this land from Mr. Suter, it's going to happen, and we're going to make it into a hotel. I think it's the only way that people can appreciate this is for it to happen to you.
Poetic justice. This is perfect, because he's one of the people who wants to take your land away to give it to another private person.
What it totally illustrates is that each state is really going to have to step up to the bait, and I think every governor is going to have to step up to the dais and say, we're going to protect you, and if they don't, you give them the hook and get somebody in there that will protect us. And I think that goes for any. I think there's. I mean, this is we're not talking on the wrong side of this issue. I think it was the low number was 94%. Were outraged by what happened to the
Well, it's all over the talk shows.
And it's gone as high as 99% that are against what the Supreme Court did. So what I'm saying to you is, I think the good consequences of this will be that governors and state senators and assembly people are going to have to step up and say, you know what, I'm going to defend you 100%.
Absolutely.
Because the polls are all going your way.
Well, Georgia has already said they're not going to let this happen in their state, and there's 3 other states, and I think Washington may be one of them, that already have this in place. So we just have to work on the other 46 states, and we'll be okay. The District of Columbia. But that's one issue, and it was the most daunting ruling that came around in the last week or two.
Oh, yeah. They could have had a stem cell thing and said that, we could clone everybody overnight, and it wouldn't have caused the furor that this did.
No, it's just an amazing, because they're coming after your house.
Yeah. See, this isn't just a local story. As I say, London on Friday, it was the headline of the newspaper.
It's amazing in the Financial Times, because it will have an impact. And my friend who's in real estate, and she does loans, and she said this is going to have a drastic effect on the real estate market, because if they can come in, why would anybody want to pay $500,000 for a condo, which they're going for now, if they feel that next year somebody could come and take it?
That deed could mean nothing.
Absolutely. It's just outrageous. So we're depending on you to help us get this thing passed with Senator McClintock. But there was another ruling that came down, and this had to do with the 10 Commandments. And there was an issue in Texas where they have a statue of the 10 Commandments embedded with 10 or 11 other statues. And then in Kentucky, they had the 10 Commandments on the courthouse wall. And this is a very schizophrenic ruling, and people don't understand it because there's no foundation to support either one of these rulings. It almost seems like this Supreme Court...
Is that a play on words?
Yes. It's almost like this Supreme Court is not helping us figure out what the rulings are, the issues are moving forward. They're just taking very little technical parts of a case and deciding on that. I'll just go back to one, we'll talk about this in a second. A couple of years ago, when the father said, I don't want under God in the pledge, well, they didn't rule on under God being constitutional or unconstitutional. All they said was the father had no standing because he wasn't the primary caretaker. Right. So that settles nothing. So again, with the 10 Commandments, we have no settlement. And tell us about the 2 issues and how the 2 rulings and how they differ.
Well, it's interesting. I have the dissenting opinion from Justice Scalia, and I like this part. Our legislatures...
Oh, for the Texas one or Kentucky?
This is Kentucky.
Okay.
Our legislatures, state and national, continue to open their sessions with prayer led by official chaplains. The sessions of this court continue to open with the prayer, quote, God save the United States and this honorable court, close quote. Invocation of the Almighty by our public figures at all levels of government remain commonplace. Our coinage bears the motto, quote, in God we trust, close quote. And our Pledge of Allegiance contains the acknowledgement that we are a nation under God. As one of our Supreme Court opinions rightly observe, we are a religious people whose institutions presuppose a supreme being, close quote. I mean, this is rather confusing to people because you have the same court with two entirely different rulings.
Well, you talked about, and I'll turn it up, Larry, but you talked about the dissent. Tell us what the ruling was for Kentucky.
Well, the ruling in Kentucky is that that is a violation of the Establishment Clause.
Right, because it was promoting one type of religion. That's what the Supreme Court
So
said in that
they
ruling.
rushed up there and they put sayings from the Quran.
They had other sayings up there to try to water it
beside it.
Yes, but they said in this particular instance, this was an establishment.
Transitory.
Right, but yet they've got the Ten Commandments right in front of the courthouse.
Well, that's because it's been put in stone.
Right.
So, I mean, well, is your house made of paper, stone, or straw? And I think this
This
was
paper
a
cut scissors,
yeah,
paper
exactly. Paper, stone, or straw here. And I think what we're looking at is this decision was made of straw. It was not very. It wasn't a very definitive statement.
No.
It didn't have a lot of weight behind it. Not a lot of conviction behind it.
It settled no issue.
And the issue is, who would pay to remove the Ten Commandments that's up in the ceiling of the Supreme Court?
Right.
Who would pay for that? And so that's where the Supreme Court has a problem, rather than a philosophical argument in favor or against. And I mean, my goodness gracious! I mean, it's this whole Supreme Court has lost its way.
Right.
I really
think
believe
so
that. I
too.
think it's
Yeah.
lost its way. It's made one bad decision after another, and for whatever purpose. I mean, I think we've got 3 possible people going out of the Supreme Court. 2 are conservative. 1 is more or less liberal. I don't see that there's going to be much changing.
No, but before we get to that, I want to talk about that in a second, but talk about the Texas decision, because in Texas it was a completely reversal.
Right.
Let me come back to
Well, are you going to talk
those
about
famous
the Texas?
8 words.
Okay.
The 8 words attributed to Thomas Jefferson. And this is a book written by David Barton, America's Godly Heritage. And I've had this book for a while. And I'm going to quote from it. Thomas Jefferson, to whom the now popular phrase, separation of church and state, is attributed, also believed, as did the other founders, that the First Amendment simply prevented the federal establishment of a single denomination, a fact that he had made clear in a letter to Benjamin Rush. In that letter, Jefferson committed himself as president to not allowing the Episcopalians, the Congregationalists, or any other denomination to achieve what Jefferson called the establishment of a particular form of Christianity. So what is the source of Jefferson's now infamous phrase? And it was a letter that he wrote to the Baptists of Danbury back in 1801. And the bottom line is that he was saying to them that there would not be a single religion in this country, and it's been twisted over the years.
Absolutely.
And it's as if it's gospel, that that's what he was intending,
Right.
and it's been the
So there is no, quote, separation of church and state in the Constitution.
There isn't.
Sadly, people forget history, and the farther back you go, the farther they forget it.
Right.
And there was a state called Pennsylvania that had a few Quakers in it, and Quakers were the farthest thing removed from any regular types of people that you'd ever find. They were against war. They didn't want to fight. They didn't want to salute the flag. We're talking a whole bunch of things they didn't want to do, and they became part of our, finally became one of the 13 founding colonies. But so obviously we had some extremes of religious viewpoints going on at that time, and we have extremes of religion now. But that doesn't equate to the founders' desire that we follow some basic rules, which included the Ten Commandments.
Right.
And that's where I think that the Supreme Court has let us down.
Okay, we're getting back. We never really focused on the
case.
Texas. The Texas case, because it was a monument
In stone.
and stone, and it was surrounded by other monuments, the Boy Scouts and other groups.
Right.
They said that this presented an historic tribute, and it was not religious based. So in that case, the majority ruled that it was okay to have that Ten Commandments stay there. So again, it's very schizophrenic. One is considered a historic monument. The other is considered an establishment of religion in Kentucky. So no issue has been settled.
No.
We'll be seeing this issue again coming up in the very near future. And the Supreme Court seems to be making rulings out of whole cloth. First they say we're going to go with international law, and then the Financial Times in London has a front page thing about what happened with the eminent domain. So it's kind of all over the place. But we didn't hear that Rehnquist, Chief Justice Rehnquist, who's quite ill, was going to retire. We didn't hear that. And there's a few others. If Rehnquist retires, it'll probably be easy to get a conservative in place because you're not changing the makeup of the court. If you have a liberal judge who retires, then there's going to be a lot of controversy because President Bush will get somebody in who's more of his conservative leanings, and then the minority in Congress is going to I can't think of the word. It's going to
They're
really
going to block them. They're going to do
roadblock
everything
it
they
and
can to block
probably
it.
filibuster because
Yes,
that was
they will.
never.
Well, you know, Sandra Day O'Connor's the second choice, and she's a more of a moderate voice,
Right.
they call it.
She's either way.
Yeah, and you know, they probably need 2 women minimum to be on the Supreme Court. That would, you know, because if Sandra Day O'Connor leaves, then they'd need, you know, there's only Ruth Bader Ginsburg left.
Right, right.
So you
It's
need 2
very
more
liberal.
women on that court of 9, and so you know you're looking at that, and the other one, you know, is just that we're gonna find out very quickly that that moderate voice of Sandra Day O'Connor is going to be tried to be twisted by the Democrats right into a very liberal point.
Right, and sometimes you can't tell. Look at sometimes the conservative president
Very true.
puts a judge in who he thinks, because of his previous rulings, is fairly conservative. Once they get on the court,
Oh yeah.
they make a 180-degree turn, and nobody can figure that out. So you really, you just do the best that you can, do your homework, get the people in there, and then hope for the best.
We have a problem, though, because once these judges are appointed, it's for life.
It's for life.
I mean, look what we had right here in California trying to get rid of a Supreme Court justice.
Right, we had to recall Rose Bird.
Rose Bird, so it's easier said than done. I think that Sandra Day O'Connor was appointed as the first woman by President Reagan.
Correct.
And she might have surprised him with some of her rulings. You just don't know.
Oh, she
Once
surprised
they-
a lot of people.
You know, once they put those robes on as to what decisions they're going to render.
Right, and it's just, I just wish they would be clearer, because people are complaining. The appellate courts and the local courts, they don't have any clear direction, so they can't look to the Supreme Court and say this is gospel, because it's all over the place.
You know, obviously the number of stem cells, I'm back on the stem cell thing here
Okay.
again, because the number of stem cells available to be cloned or fixed, you know, the recent findings have found that they can take your own stem cells and they can make body parts for yourself, replacement parts for yourself.
Yeah, I like that.
And that's really where they've been wanting to go all along.
Sure.
But in order for that to happen, they're going to be challenged in the courts by a lot of different people and different groups, and it's going to be up to that court to decide whether or not it's okay, because
Right.
the expanding the number of, it's technical, but you know, they think there's 140 lines now, but they only use 40 or 50, and there could be thousands of these lines.
Right.
So it's very technical, but it will be a part of the court, and the court will have to make a big decision on that. So that's
so
laying
stay tuned, because
Yeah.
it's coming up.
There's
and
going to be either
Absolutely.
2 or 3 changes during the Bush administration.
well, yeah,
And getting them through.
we all predict that. We only have a few seconds left. Gentlemen,
Yeah.
thank you so much for being here. I need to give you the website. Well, why don't you give the website?
It's www.cuttingedge, all one word, center-a-talkshow.com,
Great.
and write us.
And Ron and Larry, as always, thank
Watch
you
some
so much.
streaming media.
Thank you so much for being with us. It's always a pleasure. And this is Lucille Kring from Kring's Corner. Thank you so much for watching. And until next time, make it a great week. And do remember our men and women in our military in here and across the world protecting us. And God bless. Boy, I just couldn't get... Hello, this is Lucille Kring, and welcome back to Kring's Corner. As I mentioned last week, I had two gentlemen who are very special, dear friends of mine, and they are wonderful, wonderful guests. And they were so much fun and so entertaining and so informative, I've invited them back this week. So again, welcome my guest, Ron Winship, who is the producer of Cutting Edge, a talk show, and Larry Gilbert, who is the reporter for A Cutting Edge, a talk show. Gentlemen, thanks for coming back.
Thank you,
It's
Lucille.
always a pleasure to be with you, Lucille.
Gosh, last week we hopscotched all over the place with the Supreme Court and what their rulings are and who's going to retire and what President Bush is going to do. Well, this week we're going to leave the feds. They're in enough trouble. Let them go. And we're going to concentrate on the state that's got a packet of problems of its own. So I thought we'd kind of just jump in to the initiatives. There are 3 that the governor is putting forth, and so far there are 5 others that have qualified from various other sources. So we may not have time to get to all of them because some of them, frankly, aren't that interesting.
Well, let's start with some little housekeeping issues here. One is our great governor, and I think he's a great governor. I mean, if you compare him to the last one, he's a really great governor.
Well, that's great.
You know, everybody right now, I think his numbers aren't as, he was up as high as 70%.
Now he's down
Where
to
is he now,
30s.
Well, he's not
struggling.
You know, he's like the Yankees. He's not hitting as good as we want him to.
Or you could tell him that he's the Dodgers. They're not doing so good
yeah,
either.
but you know,
Should I tell everybody who you voted for?
No, seriously, folks. I mean, you
He's
know,
a homer.
he had a bunch of issues that he wanted to fix, and he said this is his year of reform.
And he was going to blow up the boxes.
Well, yeah,
right.
but you know, he was holding them off with one hand last year and kind of running ahead of the debate with the other. Anyway, Larry and I have been doing a lot of work on these initiatives as far as what the governor wants. He had that one, of course, he wanted this teacher tenure, which we agree with, kind of, and then he wanted to make it a government that actually will pay its own way. We thought that was kind of the right thing to do.
That's kind of an interesting thing.
These are
concept.
These are not particularly revolutionary concepts.
No, absolutely
but
not.
the one that we had the problem with was this redistricting aspect, and the
You two
reason
don't
why.
agree? I can't believe it.
No, it's no.
There may be other things, but we won't get into that now.
The idea is correct. Okay, there's no doubt that when you say words like gerrymandering to somebody, their eyes glaze over. They have no concept of what that is. But when I mentioned in passing that one of the guys in the assembly has a district that runs from Garden Grove to the Oregon border, that got some people's attention. That actually that kind of gives you a picture of what can happen.
That's poetic license.
So, having said that, there's probably a desperate need to redistrict. The problem is, how do you do it?
Okay, now why is there a desperate need for redistricting? As the governor said, of all the races last year in the assembly, it's every 2 years, so it's 2000, 2002, all the even numbers, 4, 6, 8, whatever.
Yeah.
And so not one person in the assembly changed political parties.
You had
And in the Senate,
You had 153 legislative and congressional district races without a single change.
Okay.
So each party kept their seat because of the gerrymandering that's been going on, and both parties were at fault.
And that was done just in 2000.
Now, don't forget who was in charge then.
Right, but and also so the
Dr. Gray himself.
And energetic Gray,
Yeah.
and his legislature is the one. And let's not forget, it also happens in the Congress, and there are people, political consultants, who the electeds pay money to make sure that their district is the district
Safe.
that serves them.
Oh, yeah.
What we need to do with redistricting is have a district where the people, the public, the voter is served. And so talk about...
Well, the issue is this. Do you change buses? Or do you go from a bus to mass transit? I mean, there's some fundamental changes that have to be made to what you said is absolutely true. People had made side deals with each other, the Republicans and the Democrats, and I really fault the Republicans because they're the minority.
Right.
Why are they buying off on this whole thing with only 14 votes in the Senate when they need to have at least another 10 to be back in the game again. And so anyway, they made these side deals to secure their own little baby borders so they could get elected again. And thank God for term limits. All I got to say is, if we didn't have term limits, this thing would be really upside down.
But you know, some people want to, just to tag on that, they want to tag changing term limits to redistricting. They said, okay, we'll support the redistricting if you put a few more years.
The governor better not touch that with a
because people still love term limits.
No, boy, I'll tell you, that's the worst one. If it's Proposition 13 and term limits are two sacrosanct issues in the state of California that they better not. They're best advised to stay away from.
Term limits, they say that, okay, the politician is out of the loop, and now it's actually the lobbyist and the staffers who control it. But my thing is, if you know you only have 6 years in the Assembly or 8 years in the Senate, you make sure you get up to speed immediately.
Correct.
And there's no downtime. You're up there and you're cranking, and you're saying, okay, I got to get this bill and that thing. And the people who come, you have to work.
Hopefully they're qualified before they run.
And so that, I think, makes them much more efficient, to my way of thinking. That's why term limits is so important. So get back to the
issue here that's really very, very pivotal. And that is, the governor said, Ted Costa, come up with an idea. Ted Costa's the guy, by the way, that came up with the recall. And so he's a great guy. We like him a lot.
Schwarzenegger likes him.
But having said that, he was charged to come up with a concept of how to redistrict reasonably.
Okay.
What they did was, very quickly, is they said, well, we'll find 3 judges.
All right.
That are independent, that don't have any political viewpoint, that haven't watched the O'Reilly Factor in 7 years, and have no concept about what a district is.
Okay,
and if we could find those 3 judges that have been cloistered away somewhere far, far distant,
and they live in Alaska.
That could be working, probably in Burma somewhere. And we fly them in here for the weekend, and they would figure out a fair and just way to district and make them contiguous districts, and make them fair, make them equal, populations, and blah blah blah. Come on. So where I fall, I don't know where Larry falls, but I fall on the side of saying, yes, we need to redistrict. And we need a new way to do it.
Now, we're kidding about the 3 judges who haven't seen the O'Reilly Factor and all that. Actually, the way the bill really reads is you're taking 25 legislatures, and they will convene and pick the judges. So you've got the Republicans.
Just who you want to pick the judges.
Got a problem with all this, though.
But that's how it's going to be. And so the Republicans will pick their couple, and the Democrats will pick their couple.
But the caveat in the plan says it can change.
Well, but the idea right now is that the ultimate persons who will redistrict will be 3, quote, independent judges, ex-judges, and they will be the ones with. So
Lucille,
got a problem?
Can you name one? Can you name one that you'd like to have do that?
Well, I don't know that. Well, the lady who was just just appointed to the appellate
Janice
court.
Brown,
She'd be great.
Yeah, she's good.
She's good.
But she's not retired, she's active.
She's not. Well, she's retired from California. Okay, so I don't know any retired judges. Actually, there's a judge who just retired from Orange County.
Maybe we can pay some judges to retire.
Well, there's always, I told you they were controversial. Anyway, okay, but the redistricting has a lot of support. The governor is really backing it, and he's going to have a ton of money behind it. And so that in some form is, I think, going to happen. And I'd like the redistricting. I think it's going to spur controversy and get it back to the people who can select their representative. Larry, you have a different viewpoint.
Well, let me just share with you that I have in my hand a report put out by the Center for Government Studies.
God love you, you have a report for everything.
I have a report for everything. I do my homework, I try anyway. And in this report, there are other proposals. In fact, Ron and I this morning were checking. I believe there's 5 still floating around for signature gathering. They got another month to qualify. Yeah. So it isn't just a Costa version. So the public really is going to be challenged to decide, read through all the fine print to see which one offers the best alternative.
Okay.
There's Costa, McCarthy, Lowenthal in this particular report compared side by side. And one of the things that I notice in the Costa version, I think it's Republicans will pick and Democrats. What about all the people who are disillusioned with both parties,
Sure.
who are declining to state now, and each party's losing hundreds of thousands of voters who want to be declined to state.
And that's the fastest growing political party in
Yes,
the
it is.
state.
Declined to state, yeah. And here's the part I like about it. Why don't we just qualify all 5 and vote for all 5 and let the courts figure out which one is okay?
Yeah,
They're going to end up in
that'll
court
be
anyway.
2040.
It's going to end up in court anyhow.
It's never going to happen.
Seriously, folks, come on.
I mean, there are definitely differences spelled out in this report that I've
Oh,
looked at.
sure.
And one of the things, why does it have to be judges? Why can't it be a business person that's got a head on his shoulders? Why is it retired judges that we're selecting for this purpose?
Well, I think that they know the law and know how to analyze things because they've been listening to they've been making opinions and listening to
it's
facts.
empathy for the legislatures because they've all had to run for office and they've all had to have people give money to them for their campaigns.
Don't
Well,
pick jokes or somebody else
No,
like that
but
may not
why
have.
not a judge? Judges are supposed to be impartial. They're supposed to listen to the facts and give the jury the information they need on how to solve the case, and they're supposed to be impartial.
I don't follow it on judges, but I'm just saying that it's very difficult to find an independent, nonpartisan, equally balanced, that's not sitting on one side of the philosophical fence or the other, that's going to be able that are making life and death decisions for lawmakers, number one, making life and death decisions for people who their representative form of government's going to be. That's where I find this, this is the old story of Robespierre. He will make the choices for us because we can't do it for ourselves, because we're not that together yet. We only have a republic. It's called a republic, okay? And we're supposed to hire people as part of that republic. These guys aren't even elected. If you're going to have 3 judges, good. Let's get a slate of 100 judges that qualify based on whoever wants to do it, and then the people of California get to vote and pick out the 3 that they want. I'll go along with that, but unless they're voted in, certainly not selected by the Republicans, and certainly not or by the Democrats.
You're going to have disenfranchised people if it's only Republicans and
that's true,
Democrats
but you're
making the call.
Yeah.
Well, and I can see that. But also, why don't we just forget about the California judges? Let's get judges from a different state who have no axe to grind.
They still should have to run, and they still should have to be elected. In other words, to represent. It's a representative form of government.
So do you think
we can't just have these guys picked out of the whole cloth.
Well, this is different. This is completely opens up a whole other side to this idea of redistricting, and it can.
We're going to write the Winship
I do not want the
Initiative.
judge in Aruba. I can say that without.
Well, he's had some problems.
Yeah.
But is this going to be? Do you want to have this for the special election? Do you want to have all these people running?
Well, I
These
think so.
judges?
I would say that if you choose a redistricting scheme that seems viable, the least you can do is to empower the people of the state of California, only 34 million of us, by the way, to pick out 3 people who they like better than the other 3 people out of the 100. And there should be 100 judges that want to do this.
But judges are so difficult. People, because we do elect judges, and when you look at the judges on the ballot,
And they'd have to run nonpartisan. They could not run as Republicans or Democrats.
well, and all judges do run nonpartisan.
Let me jump in.
And it's so hard for people. I get calls all the time. Who's this judge? How do I know? What do I
That's
know
right.
about the background? So if you don't know them, I always say, don't vote for anybody because you can really mess it up. Unless you really know what they're about.
Lucille, we were talking about the Costa plan. Let me just give you, and I have no axe to grind with this because I want to see if the others ever get the qualified signatures to even be on the ballot. Lowenthal says 10 Democrats, this is the candidate pool composition, 10 Democrats, 10 Republicans, and 5 other citizens who are not registered with either of these parties. He goes further to say the pool selected by 10 retired judges on a court of appeals chosen by commission on judicial appointments establish a pool of 25 citizens, where Costa is talking about 25 retired judges.
Everybody's
or
eyes are
24.
glazing over, you know that, Larry. They're all going, this is too complex.
It is.
It is.
It's not a slam dunk.
Yeah.
And yes, it needs to be done.
God.
There is a need to solve this problem.
But the problem does, in fact, exist. We're going to have to face it. Now, because the governor is the only one that has the courage to even face it. Think about all of the people that we voted in that are Republican or Democrat that are serving in our Assembly or State Senate, and they haven't faced this issue. They don't want to deal with it. They're saying, oh no, we want to wait until the normal 10-year process and pray that we can make another side deal before it gets by.
The other issue that we disagree on this, I think, Costa wants to put it in as of 2006.
Okay.
Our population is supposed to grow by another 3 million people between the 2000 census and then. So again, we don't know where those people are living. I think we need to wait till the next
Well, you could do it again in
decade.
2010. You could do it in 6 and you could do
True.
it in 12.
Well, but see, Arnold's really just upset about the composition of who's there now, and I can't help but agree with him 100%. He's exactly right. But I mean, if you're going to change something, it's okay, But
Change
let's
is
do it
good.
right. Let's do it somewhat right.
Yeah, well, none of us likes change because we're just creatures of
Yeah.
habit, but change is inevitable. This was changed a few years ago, so it was only changed 4 years ago,
Right.
and now we need to change it again. So we'll get it right eventually.
So let's talk about teacher tenure instead.
Okay, we really fixed the redistricting,
We messed up
didn't we?
redistricting.
So Devin is slam dunk. We don't know. Okay, you pick.
Well, actually, according to the register recently, this reapportionment is not doing well. Actually, the field poll said 46% to 35% oppose it, but they haven't seen. There's been no
You
advertisement
need a
on this
clear
at all.
and definite purpose, I think.
Yeah. Anyway, okay. You want us to talk about teacher tenure?
Well,
Sure.
Let's talk
And
about teacher
the
tenure.
governor, this is one of his bills too, his initiatives. He wants to raise tenure from 2 years, which it currently is, to 5 years for teachers.
Outrageous.
And because tenure guarantees almost a virtual lifetime guarantee of a job. And this is leading, there's 61 to 32%, it's leading in the field poll. So,
Well, when I
Go
grew
for
up, and I had my second grade teacher who I adored. She was my favorite person in the whole planet, next to my mom. But probably I liked her better than my mom because she was nicer to me than my mom was at that time. But having
was
said
second grade.
having said that, that's when tenure was 15 years
really?
in the state of California. You had to work for 15 years in order. That was way back. And it was way back, but that was 15 years in order to keep your job. You had to be a teacher for 15 years in this California school system before you could keep your job. And then when you
Wow.
get into the professorships and the state universities and all that sort of thing, it's down to 2 years. That
When
means
did that
you or
happen?
I don't have the foggiest clue of how it drifted down very quickly based on, of course, they didn't have great pensions for teachers back in those old days either. And so the same thing applies. But, the issue is that, tenure shouldn't be a 2-year gig. You get out of college and somebody likes you for 2
Yeah,
years.
keep your nose clean for 2 years and a lifetime job.
And you got a lifetime job. Doesn't make sense to me.
Let me jump in, Ron. There was a time when I really did work for a living, and maybe 20 years ago, I remember that kids coming out of college in Japan were guaranteed lifetime jobs by the industry that would hire them.
Ah,
That's not true anymore. I mean, I remember
true.
a time when I worked with companies on the East Coast, people had 18 years in waiting for their pension and were terminated in the government subcontract business because they didn't get to that 20. There is no guarantee today. Why why should school teachers, with all due respect to the fine work that most of them do, have special treatment
Yeah.
as opposed to the public sector, the private sector?
that's right, because years ago when I was working in the private sector, that you had to have 10 years in before your pension was vested. Now I think
Right.
it's a year or two.
Exactly.
And I did start out my career as a chemistry teacher, so I've gone through
You know what we're talking about.
yeah, but and teaching is not an easy job. You just go in there and
You have to be a really dedicated, caring
very
human being.
dedicated. Takes a lot of work, and the kids aren't always the best, and sometimes
That's right.
the parents don't come to the meetings, and you're pulling your hair out. So it's
And that's
not
my
an
very
easy
point.
job.
My very point is this: if we were graduating every single child that went into high school in this state, I'd say, yeah, they're doing a pretty darn good job. But considering they're only, there's numbers from 40% to 50%
Right.
to 60%. You're going, in certain isolated cases, obviously, you're getting 80% or 85% graduation rates, but not very many in the state of
But
California.
Ron, peel the onion back. I wonder how many of the students sadly are children of illegal immigrants that are in the school system, who the parents do not speak English at home to help the kids acclimate themselves into the school environment.
But that's a
It's
different
even
issue
more
for a
so.
different show. We're just talking about the tenure for the teachers.
Right.
So let's put the illegal
Okay.
immigration
5 years
situation.
is obviously a very moderate proposal. Fully support it, 100%.
We agree.
Okay, well, good. Well, then we'll
We
move
agree
on
on
that
that one.
because we don't have very much time left.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the live within your means. That seems to be something that people are really concerned about.
Right.
That's something that, I don't know who supported that. The governor is supporting
Governor
it. But
making it
Senator
up.
John Campbell had a different version, which they say really would tighten, because you'd have to live with, there is some formula that he has, and Tom McClintock
It's the
says...
government that has to live within their means, by the way, not us.
Right, because we're all...
We're all consumers,
We have no
so we have no
choice.
choice.
We're all living within our means.
We're
and
just
you do-
consumers. We just do whatever
But
we're told.
Tom McClintock has something, the 5, 6, and 9, I think he says. 5% is the normal growth
Right.
of spending. 6% is what the population is increasing every year. But I think he said 20% is what the state spends. And so it's not a problem.
Additional to what they
additional
get
to
in.
what they get in.
Yeah.
So it's not it's not a problem not having enough money. It's a problem of spending too much. So. Then the governor has this, it's called Live Within Your Means, and where's this? The field poll of likely voters is supporting the, I'm sorry, where am I? Yeah, oh no, it's being opposed by 42% to 35%. But again, the governor hasn't come out strongly. He's had a few commercials, but not as strongly as the other side. Because there's concern about the education funding and about...
Well, they're obfuscating the concept here. They're saying, well, you know, if we have to live within our means, then somebody's going to steal out of our pot. I mean, it doesn't matter what part of government it is. They're all worried about their little pot of gold and somebody reaching into their highway trust fund that they want for something else, looking in their parks department for something else. I mean, they're now, oh, my education budget for something else. So what it's just as you opened, or you mentioned this several times, Lucille, you know, if the government would collect our gas tax and use the actual taxes for gas tax for our highways, we'd have plenty of highways to go around, but they're not using it.
And they'd be in great shape.
And they'd be in very well upkeep, would be fine.
Okay.
But as it is, this isn't the case. So, you know, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, living within your means is a very reasonable request. I think we need to look at it and say, you know, I mean, the devil is always in the details, but in this particular case, you know, each one of these little fiefdoms is all worried about what will come out of their pocket rather than what living within their means. And actually, well, if everybody's going to cut across, because it's going to cross the board cut.
Right,
is what they're asking for.
right.
It's not just on
No.
one thing or another.
Well, and that's because if this passes, and the governor, if there's not enough money, he can say, okay, we're going to go back to the budget that happened 2 years ago.
Right.
And that usually is less, because every year the budget seems to
Right.
increase incrementally. Some school funding with Prop 98 is an automatic increase. Other
right.
things, they actually put it into the budget. So he'll have the opportunity to go back and reduce that, as you say, across the board. So it's going to be interesting, because the campaign is going to heat up dramatically.
Well, we're only about 6 or 12 billion, depending on who you talk to, short every year. We're spending $6 to $12 billion more than we bring in. If you add, and I hate, this is another show, but if you add the illegal immigrants that are coming in, and the infrastructure debilitation, and the road work, and all of the other, and the hospitals, and the health care, and blah, 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 pretty soon you're talking about real money. And right now, if they're not even going to try to make up to hit what they're bringing in, if they're just saying, well, we're just going to be 6 to 12 over every year, tough luck.
Ron, look at the set aside for pensions.
Yeah.
And we're not even getting into the pension issue, which you
No,
dropped.
and the pension issue is just a gigantic malaise.
Look at this, what
it's
the
unbelievable.
grand jury just came
Unfunded
down with.
pensions in this county are in this whole country, but in California, it's the pensions. Right, they just said, I love this one. This is a great buzzword. Okay, 40% of all the money that's allocated to the California Highway Patrol every year, each and every year, goes to what? Pensions.
Yeah. Our salary and pensions are a big part of the budget.
40% of
It
the
is.
whole budget for the California Highway Patrol goes to pensions.
But then, you all know, some people say, okay, public safety is the number one issue of any government,
But
whether the
are
feds
public
or state.
pensions in the public service?
Yeah, I know. These are very, very difficult issues because they'll say these people are putting their lives on the line and they have to retire at a
No
young
question.
age because of
No
the fact
question.
that it's a tough job.
They do
and
a
they can't
terrific
take it.
job, and they should be rewarded just for showing up. But having
Well,
said
they should do
that,
something.
no, but I'm serious. But having said that, I mean, is it okay for the guys that are doing the groundwork at the local high school to get 3 at 50? Is it okay for them to take out 50% of their annual budget just for their pensions too?
Yeah, it
I mean,
gets
it
tough.
just starts to become a case of equivocation. What's fair, what isn't, and what's working and what's not.
Well, this is off that topic, but I was just talking to somebody who's very high in the educational administration in a certain city, and he said that some of the problems that they have, we've already discussed it with language and things, but he said one of the big problems is the fact that our money goes to Sacramento. All the education money should be handled locally. Because once it goes to Sacramento, it always gets funneled off because you have the administration, the Department of Education, and whatever they're doing. So for every dollar that goes up, a dollar doesn't come back even. And then you have the uneven distribution. So if we could get back, and maybe this is an initiative we need to think about, bringing back education money on the local level and keep it here so the local boards and superintendents can decide how best to use it.
So we need 3 more judges.
3 more judges.
I don't
No, it's
think
just
so.
an
So
initiative.
we're donor cities is what you're saying.
We're a donor city,
We're
of
donor
course.
cities.
Yeah.
But that happens all the time.
Well,
in Orange County,
we
which-
better elect people that are going to go back up to Sacramento and say, I'd like to have, our money back.
Yes.
Yeah.
And actually.
and have some clout about it. Yeah.
Okay, we only have 2 minutes left.
All
There's
right.
something about.
Protect my paycheck.
Go ahead. Go ahead. 2 minutes.
This is a big one. It's a sleeper because it's the pot of gold for the unions, where all of especially the teachers, pay into their dues. Some of that money's been used for political purposes. They will have the opportunity to refuse to allow that money to be spent for people they may not support or initiatives they may not support. If that money dries up, that would have a real impact on the CTA and other unions within the state.
Okay.
So obviously the unions are going to vote against this.
They're going to push against it. But
And where is that?
So
Because-
that's a 1084, Public Employees Union Dues Retired Employee Consent for Political Contributions Initiative and Statute by Lou Uller of the Taxpayers.
Okay, and that's going to be a real contested.
Euler.
that was out a
Initiative,
couple
too.
years ago. I think it was Prop
He got me.
226.
Lou got me on this.
Well, we only have a few
Uller.
seconds left.
Euler.
So, Ron, again, thank you
Yeah.
for being here. Larry, again, thank you
Don't
for being
forget
here.
our website.
Your website, go ahead.
Cutting Edge Center-a talkshow.com.
Okay, and if you've
Tune
enjoyed,
in, always,
them
frequently.
here, they have a talk show on the web that is just sensational. These are
Thank you.
entertaining men. They do their homework. They're real passionate about what they believe in,
You're
and you can
sensational.
see.
We love you.
Thank you so
Your hair
much.
looks great today, Lucille.
Thank you. My hairdresser will be happy. This is Lucille Kring from Kring's Corner. Thank you so much for being here. And until next time, make it a great week. And please remember our men and women in the armed forces around the world and serving also in the United States. Remember them in your prayers and thoughts and all their families. God bless and see you next time.
I pledge to never commit, condone,
or remain silent about domestic violence and encourage men to work together with women.
in every community and across the nation.
Take a stand. Take the pledge.
Visit www.takethepledge.gov for more information.
Gentlemen, I think you'll find this space to be exactly what you need.
We have something in here you're really going to like.
Family.
We love you, Daddy.
Isn't it about time? From the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints,